country down in Victor Harbor. I've got my my line's a little bit funny, so I may come in and out. I've had to reconnect a couple of times already, but we're in the process of doing our wrap, a reflect wrap at the moment at Victor Harbor. So it's really lovely to be able to join you today and to listen and to do lots of learning from people who are already ahead of us. So I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Mayor Fricker.
Hello, Elizabeth Fricker from town of Walkerville. We haven't even started, I'll be honest. Hence, I have my notebook out as I did the, not last meeting, I couldn't attend, but the meeting before. I think it'll be something that will happen in the next term. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Quigley.
Hi, Joanne Quigley, Mayor of the District Council of Lower Eyre Peninsula. This is my first meeting. My Deputy Mayor, I believe, represented us the last meeting. We are just in the process, or I think have just engaged a consultant to help us start this process. So looking forward to hearing what everyone else has been doing and moving this forward. And I'm going to have to leave at 11, sorry.
Sarah Gilmore, just looking at you now.
Good morning, representing City of Adelaide this morning. Sarah Gilmore, and I'm the Associate Director of Parklands Policy and Sustainability, so reconciliation sits within my program. We are progressing our stretch wrap, and I also sit across the reconciliation committee that we have here at Council.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Tina Hudson, Playford.
Morning, yes, Tina Hudson, the General Manager of City Services from Playford. We are really very much at the beginning of our wrap journey, and there's a fair bit of activity going on for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Galaxy A22 5G. Not sure.
Good morning, Carol Neal from City of Tea Tree Gully, Director of Community and Cultural Development, sitting in for John Moyle. We have been through a reflect wrap, and we're just having time to see what the next steps are for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for joining us, Carol. James Hollyman, I've just seen you pop up there.
Yes, so coming to you from the land of the Bowenditch, we started our conversations with the First Nations BC, so before COVID, obviously held up through that process, so we'll work through that. And I'm CEO of the District Council of Rogue.
Wonderful, thank you, James. And it looks like Marnie Locke is still joining us with the sound. So thank you all. It's lovely to have you all here and give everybody the opportunity to understand where we all are this morning. So I'll hand back to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for everybody. Just give us a quick run around. Appreciate that, and it helps me centre who's in on the conversation. So that's great. I'm just quickly going to go through some formalities just around the minutes. Was obviously we had I had COVID, so I apologise for not being here. But I think I was on my hospital bed at the time, so apologies for not being here. But I hear it was a great conversation with some interstate local government representatives, I believe, some councillors from interstate, and I did have a read through the very long transcript. Thank you, Melissa. In the minutes. Does anyone have any comments about the minutes, or did we miss anything that was on there, or you're happy for us to, you know, lock them in? I don't know. It's just a great opportunity to hear from people that are outside our circle. So that was wonderful that they could do that, and we are really appreciative of that. There were a couple of actions that came out of that. One, I'm just looking at them now. One was around wrap statuses. So if you've we're taking notes always around people's wrap statuses, but if you have a change in your wrap status, please let us know. We'd like to keep it updated so we can have a bit of a a view across the state around where people are at around their reconciliation journey. It also helps us shape potential forums into the future. So if we notice that there are RAPs that aren't being renewed, we may well run some forums around catching that space. There might be a bit extra support we can provide to councils around running some forums to help that transition between each RAP from reflect to an innovate or innovate to stretch. So it just gives us the line of sight on that. So that would be really helpful if we could just flick that off to Melissa, an update on your RAP status. The other one is if you'd like some online workshops. So we are absolutely happy to run online workshops. We run them regularly in other sectors. So if you feel that there's a need for online workshops, let us know and we'll start the ball rolling with that. As soon as we get, at least 10 people on, we'll start running those online forums for you. So please feel free to do that at any stage. The only other action that sits attached to this minutes is the Clinton and Shona to discuss how-to guide around best practice in pathways for councils working with First Nations communities. So that is an action that still is progressing as we go forward. So we'll keep you up to date around how that happens. Most of our conversations at the moment centered around the elections coming up. So we are a little bit excited about that one as well. But if you're okay, I'll endorse those minutes. That's okay. Any dissenters? I've got lots of head nods, so thank you for that. While we wait for Keith to come along, I'm just changing my agenda over. Keith's going to be here at 10:30, so we've got another 10 minutes. I just thought I'd give you a bit of a rundown around our local officers meeting that we had 2 weeks ago. As I said, we had about 40 people in the room and online come in on that one. I believe it was about 40. It was a really good conversation, a great mix of people from community development positions through to strategic positions. And we did have a very robust conversation around what some of the priorities are for that particular group. And what did pop up was conversations around obviously, doing reconciliation action plans and getting runs on the board, motivating leaders in that space, and being able to engage, I suppose, those who can cut the red tape that they experience. There was a lot of discussions around how do we resource this work. Often it falls on unfunded or unresourced areas. So they were keen to talk to each other and what each other have done to assist in that, and how do they motivate an understanding of the value of doing this, and how it helps councils or their particular location progress. One of the biggest conversations, and I think it complements today, was around contested authority. I think the word was used. That was one of the biggest conversation pieces that happened at that local government around, in that particular group, was around feeling a bit pulled and pushed and not knowing what direction to go in local communities, especially around when you want to progress your RAP. Particular community groups would, say, I'm the one with authority on that, where there were other particular groups that were saying they had authority, and feeling like the meat in the sandwich sometimes. So that was a really big conversation piece. It was I reckon we had probably about 30 minutes on conversation about that and people's experiences. So that was certainly something that came from that. We are happy to provide the minutes to that meeting, just so you can see, I suppose, a bit of fuller around the conversations that happened around the table. So that way you can have a bit of a look. So we'd be happy to share that with you, but and also who came, so you can connect with that officer if you wanted to, for that, around what happened in that conversation and how they felt the meeting went. But we have another one scheduled in 6 months' time. We'll let you know what that date is. They all wanted to come to this meeting too. So they go, can we just come to this one as well? I said, well, maybe you can talk to your CEO or your mayor about the conversations we had here. So there is a lot of interest from that particular group. So that was really, really lovely. Happy to take that conversation offline, but we have. Sit down. Did you want a drink, Keith, before?
I can get some water.
I know, just get in.
No, that's all fine.
I'll take a breath for a second, but I'm really happy and really grateful to be able to introduce Keith Thomas, the CEO of South Australian Native Title Services here. We had a lovely coffee the other day and had a bit of a yarn about this group. Keith, we've got at the moment today, we've nearly got 20 people around in the meeting today. We have a bit more usually. So I think this is my fault because I changed the meeting because I was in Canberra the other day. So it's probably my fault the numbers are lower than normal. This particular group gets together 4 times a year, online and in person. And we talk about conversations in the reconciliation space. One of the big conversations that popped up is around connecting with communities and connecting with traditional owner groups. I thought, well, let's get Keith in to have a bit of a conversation. CEO, and obviously there's we got representatives here from Adelaide and our country regions all the way down to Baltic country as well online today. James is there. Yeah, we just thought we'd bring you in for a chat if that's all right.
Fine, yeah, excellent.
I'm happy to have a chat.
Excuse me, Shona, we just need to let Keith know that we're recording.
Keith, we are recording the conversation.
Damn, I would have got dressed up. That's all good. That's all good.
I just think we'll just start off a little bit just around, because it's always nice to hear from you, your story, but can you just give the group a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what SANS is and the kind of work that SANS does? If that's
Sure. My name's Keith Thomas. I'm the CEO of South Australian Native Title Services. My ancestors are the Kurin Bibbulmun, which is down the southwest of Western Australia. That Nyungar is the term more locally known as, that type of thing. So I have a lot to thank anthropologists for, because we have photographs from that going back to my great-great-great-grandmother, and that's way back to before colonisation started, essentially. So that's great. Enough about me. South Australian Native Title Services is the native title service provider for South Australia. So we provide services to all Aboriginal groups in South Australia that request them. We can't force ourselves on people on that. The Native Title Act is what we work to, and that type of thing. And the main goal for the last nearly 30 years now has been to get people native title. We've got native title over 60% of the state now, but we still have 20 claims on our books at the moment still going. But a number of those, there's already consent determination agreements in the pipeline, but as local government probably knows, there's a lot of tenure within different areas, and we have to deal with the different tenures to see what's extinguished and what's not extinguished. But we also then provide post-native title services as well, which is supporting the corporations set up to manage their native title rights and interests, to help them develop capacity and that to manage their native title rights and interests. And at the end of the day, we'd love to see ourselves do ourselves out of a job, because they're able to manage their rights and interests in their own right, and all of their other relationships that they have, which can include local government and that type of thing. And just before I finish on SANS, I think it's also important to say that we're also members of the National Native Title Council, which looks at native title issues on a broader perspective around the whole country. First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, which is all the states once again involved in that, in trying to improve and modernise Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal Heritage Acts around the country. And we've started consultations with the federal government in terms of modernising the federal government's Heritage Act. So it's a good start there. And we're also a member of the South Australian Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisations Network, SACOM, which is the Close the Gap activities and that type of thing. And I might just touch there that I don't think we've met with local government yet about Close the Gap initiatives and that type of thing as SACOM, but that's a different area to what I'm here for today.
Keith, I'm just one of the conversations that we often find ourselves in. There's another group that sits, an officer level group that sits alongside this group as well. There's a lot of intersection spaces between local governments and native title groups and traditional owner groups. What are some of the ones that you see pop up a fair bit around the intersections between the two? Not everyone might have had connections with the native title groups, but what is it that you're seeing around some of the key
Oh.
intersection points?
I suppose first off, I'll start by saying there has been a sort of a fairly long history of working with local government, and that started way back in the late 90s, I reckon, with the statewide initiative with local government. The LGA was a part of that, and meeting with different councils around the state as well in terms of how they could interact with the native title groups and that. So that was right at the beginning where we didn't have a lot of native title and everything. So the landscape has virtually completely changed now with native title being decided in a lot of the regions around the state. So a lot of the interaction comes in through, as I mentioned, heritage and the interaction with council, with development stuff and that type of thing. So usually there's clearance work to be done, or maybe engage monitors to make sure that if there's remains or anything and that type of thing, to keep watch on those things. Land management as well, there's top of my head, there's a couple of councils I know where Cooper Pedy Regional Council has a co-management arrangement with the Anikitini Matu Yankunytjatjara Aboriginal Corporation, which is a native title, but easier to say AMIAC there, which co-manage the, what's the name of that Bullman Park now? Just outside of Cooper Pedy. The
Breakaways.
Breakaways, beautiful. That's the one. yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And also the Berry Council has an arrangement with the Murray and Mallee Aboriginal Corporation there with the arrangements with the management of Lake Bonnie and that type of thing. And the Commonwealth's come in there and they've funded a couple of ranger positions for the group to do works around that area and that within the Berry Council area and that. So yeah, so there's some strong sort of intersections there. And then probably in a broader sense in terms of engaging in relation to council services and cultural sort of services in that respect. So for implementing your RAP might be part of that, or other agreements and that type of thing, where councils can learn about the cultural diversity of their regions and that type of thing, and engage in putting in place things which can be consulted with the groups about what can be put in there. I know where I live out at Gawler, you can walk around the pathways and you'll see, Ghana names and that type of stuff, and some signage around Ghana people and that type of thing. So, and I know Elliston Council put a monument up over there as well, and that type of thing. So there is a lot of sort of intersection and that type of thing, but it doesn't mean to say everything's perfect. I think, I don't know if there's a reluctance, but I think, councils shouldn't be shy in approaching native title groups about engaging and that type of thing, because I think if you get together, build that relationship, build that trust, and you can have those open and transparent discussions. I think it's good for the whole community. It's good for everybody, I think, moving forward. And that type of thing. So, yeah.
Feel free to ask any questions at any time. Oh, Heather's got
Got a question from Heather in the room, and then for those on the screen, if you do want to maybe just pop your hand up, because that'll then audio on the screen, so we can make sure we get around to all of you in the audio. You want to ask your question, or if you want to pop it in the chat box too, we can ask that on your behalf. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for coming here this morning. What can you tell me what a great outcome would look like? Like, what are we striving for?
Oh, look, I think it's having that relationship and having that get together, reconciliation essentially, but it's about working together, have an understanding and empathy for each other and that type of thing, and understand that people might have different views and that, but I think in working together, I think you're better able to manage those and work together to get solutions and that type of thing. So I think that's probably the key to everything, is having that good communication, having that cross understanding. And I think it's an opportunity too for councils where they don't have a good understanding of Aboriginal culture to gain that from the traditional owners of the region in which they live and that type of thing. So yeah.
Just looking up at the screen now, recognising that for many of you, you're all in various states of discussion on some of these. So it's a really good opportunity to ask some quite specific questions or quite general questions. Mayor Burgess, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, Peter. Nice to have you there. We've got a challenging situation with native title in our area, and Nort Conservation Park, you may be aware of. So the history is that Mr. Richard Hunter in his day didn't want to partake in native title or the claim. He just wanted the lands to be shared with everybody. Time progresses on, and now we have a situation where we have people from the Riverland, I think, have almost put a title claim in on that area. The family that's been working that tourism site for 30 years is now feeling a bit threatened and working with the Narrandjeri people and maybe a counterclaim, I'm not sure. But council's worked closely with that site and the Hunter and Campbell family to make it a tourism destination. We have 2 major cruise boats pull in every week. It's creating a lot of tension for me as a mayor and our council on how we manage the situation between the 2 groups. And in the background, Jew apparently own the land. And there's been the offer of co-management for at least 20 years that's never quite come off. I'm just totally confused and would seek any advice or assistance.
Yeah.
Happen smoothly.
Yeah, and I suppose I should identify that I don't know if I have a conflict there because we represent the native title group involved in those discussions and that, but I'll talk about it in any event. And it goes beyond co-management. The state government is actually looking to hand over title to the park to a group. Of course, we say it should be the traditional owners who hold that native title, but the people who are managing it, Richard Hunter's family and that type of thing, I don't see things changing. I think they're still able to manage it. It's just who's holding the underlying title to the lands and that type of thing. And we say that should rest with the native title holders, even though they're not native title holders yet, but we're moving very strongly towards a consent determination there as well. So that's part of the discussions that have been taking place between the groups and the native title. My feeling is that things have probably slipped a bit in the last maybe 6 to 12 months with COVID and everything else. People haven't been able to get together. The lawyer that we had representing that was stuck in Melbourne through COVID for 6 months, I think it was in the end. He couldn't get back in here to South Australia. And then because we've got 3, I'm making excuses here, but we've got 3 trials running at the same time, and we've never been in that. And I don't think any other native title body in the country has been in the position of having 3 trials going at the same time. So there's a lot of pressure on our staff and that type of thing to deal with the trials. So some of those other things have been sitting back for the moment while that's been dealt with. But I'm fairly certain that that's going to be continuing again fairly soon, and that and I'm aware of the tensions, and I know they've had a community meeting and a couple of other meetings with the groups, but I can't tell you because I'm not aware of what the progress has been in those discussions and that type of thing, because generally they're confidential to the groups and that type of thing. But I do know that some action has taken place, and hopefully we'll have some good news moving forward to be able to provide to you.
I'm happy for the native title thing to happen. I think it's a good and fair outcome. The problem, it's not going to be as smooth as I think you're alluding to, in that the people who had from up putting in the claim don't have the same connection to the Hunters and the Campbells, and the Campbells, the politics of it, they feel a bit threatened.
Yeah.
And they don't just want to end up being volunteers over land that they have nurtured for so many years.
Well, and they'll be traditional owners as well, because they're part of the claim group as well. So, you know, they win either way, sort of thing. But those discussions will keep taking place, and hopefully we can reach an amicable solution moving forward. Yeah.
Look, I hope you do. I sit on the co-management board when I'm available, and
yep.
You know, closer to it. The tensions are high, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's panning out quite the way that maybe you're expecting.
That's probably a good point there. A lot of our councils do find themselves in awkward situations navigating those relational politics that are playing out. But what advice might you have for councils about going about that due diligence to make sure they're speaking to the right people, or how do they not find themselves wedged in the middle with some of these issues?
No, for sure. And it's very important, because where there is native title, obviously talk to the native title holder group, the PBC, and or where there's not native title and there's a native title claim, talk to the claimants about that process, because native title is communal. It incorporates all Aboriginal people who have connection to that country. And when you have your native title, they represent all of the traditional owners. They're elected by the traditional owner group to represent them on behalf of the group and that type of thing. So from my point of view, it's a very important thing to happen, and that they are recognized by law, and that as the traditional owners, and they should be consulted in any matters happening on their country as such. And then if there are other interests, then I think those other interests need to be addressed, but it's probably that group that should be addressing those issues. I think if people go out and do other things, you make a wedge that sort of, can create more conflict than there necessarily has to be in terms of trying to find a resolution. So, yeah.
Another question too, we've got a number of coastal councils on here too, particularly regionally. Do issues play out any differently where there's coastal areas involved?
Oh, I don't think so. There is a difference in that native title claims go to usually the astronomical low tide watermark and that, but there can be sea claims put in separately to that. Like the Far West Coast, for example, have just gone through a trial for a sea claim over there, and there's other groups who have sea claims in and that type of thing. So that can be different in that respect. Sorry, what was that?
No, that's right. No, just because I was aware there were some sea claims that were playing.
Oh, indeed. But the reality is, generally, it's the same group that's involved in it and that type of thing. So it's still a matter of catching up with those PBCs and that type of thing to address it. And look, I think it's fair to say there are more similarities between all Aboriginal groups around the state than there are differences, and cultural practices and that can differ on the coast, because fishing and shellfish and that might have been a part of their diet, whereas inland they're after the kangaroos, and near the coast the wombats are certainly over the Far West Coast and that type of thing. And everything that was useful was used for Aboriginal people in that cultural sense. So, but generally, storylines run through country and that type of stuff. The Seven Sisters storyline is probably the biggest storyline in the state, because it runs up from Wave Hill up at Armada in the APY lands, crisscrosses over the state all the way down to York Peninsula at Innes National Park, and that's a very strong storyline and that type of thing. So yeah.
If you have to, not everyone might know around the importance of storylines and what it means, and why it's such a big part of the native title world. Are you able to give a bit more around that?
Oh yeah, the storylines essentially are associated with the Jukupa, as the APY people call it, the dreaming stories and that sort of thing. So there's a whole story, like the Seven Sisters, for example, about these sisters who were followed by a man, a wadi, and that type of thing, and ends up at the end of the day getting pregnant, one of the ladies, and that type of thing. And that's that important site around Lochiel. There, that's the pregnant lady there, which they've now put some wind farms up on top and that type of thing. But there are land features then associated with those storylines and that type of thing. There are spiritual sort of aspects to those storylines and that type of thing as well. There are spiritual beings or that associated with different sites along the way, and the different sites are associated with different aspects of the story. It might be the Wadi Nira who might have a site there, and that one might be one about the ladies and that type of stuff. And there are different the different groups along that storyline are responsible for maintaining those sites and looking after that story and looking after country and that associated with it. So, and the important aspect there, which I think I've shown, is that connection between people, land and spirit. You know, it's all part of a holistic life that Aboriginal people lead and that type of thing. And it never ceases to amaze me. I've been working in this for nearly 28 years or something in native title and that, but I'm always learning. And it, just as Aboriginal people, it's like going to school your whole life because there's learning. People don't travel as much as they used to by foot and that type of thing. It's the motor car now and that. So, but it was always learning and going to different places and learning the stories for that place. And a lot of those stories are also associated where water is, because water is the lifeblood of people and the country, but it also attracts the wildlife, another food source and that type of thing. And also with the types of food sources that might be there as well, because they talk about the mulu dreaming, which is kangaroo dreaming, the kalea, the emu, and then you've got your, you know, the fruits and the vegetables sort of things and that. So that all of those things are intertwined. And a lot of the paintings that you see, which might be about something, actually telling a story on the ground about, you know, this is where you'll find these things. This is our country, and this is what you will find on our country and that type of thing. So, yeah. So.
No, you go.
I was just looking at the screen. Any questions from anybody online? Mayor O'Loughlin, City of Prospect.
Good day, and thanks for coming in and having a chat to us. Terrific information you've shared so far. Prospect's working pretty hard with the Ghana Yurta Aboriginal Corporation on trying to commence a Makarrata process with them and our entire community, not just them, and an agreement that might look like a treaty at the end of the day. And what we're finding is willing people on the kayak side, but a virtually complete lack of resource on their part. They're unpaid as board members. They don't really have a secretariat, really. And whereas as a council, you know, we've got staff who can service the meetings, take the minutes, and we've said that's our part of the deal. But things take a long time to get through the kayak process simply because they don't have the infrastructure that we're used to dealing with, which is staff to receive, note, write reports, do the research, make recommendations to the board, and then that speeds up the board decision-making process. So question is, how do we make sure that these native title bodies have the right amount of resource so that councils can effectively work with them, you know, and not be seen to be driving them, but then have, you know, a reciprocal amount of resource to be able to deal with the matters that come before us, which are one, opportunities, but two, could very real be complex matters that need to be dealt with properly by, you know, enough people to get around the topic, not just board members.
No, very important questions that you have there, David. At the moment, SANS, we act as like a back office for them. So we deal with a lot of the information coming through. We support kayak. I've lost one of my managers to kayak, I think, because they do have a lot of work to do. They meet every couple of weeks, which is very prolific in terms of having meetings. You know, most of them would be like this group 4 times a year sort of thing, but they're meeting every 2 weeks. But yes, funding is an important aspect. They did receive some funding from the state government as compensation for their loss of their native title rights and interests, because there's a lot of extinguishment. But that compensation only related to matters which were after 1975, when the Racial Discrimination Act came in. So a lot of extinguishment in their country happened way before that. You know, we're talking about colonization commencing in 1836. So there's nearly 140 years there of activity where there hasn't been any compensation, but that's something that might be looked at in the future. But it's also the money they did get, they've actually put into 3 trusts, you know, property trust, I think, bringing people back to country. What's that word?
Repatriation.
Repatriation, that's the one I'm looking for. And another one, I'm not sure if that's around social activities or not, but there's 3 trusts being set up to manage those funds. So but out of that, they didn't put anything aside for the management committee, so to speak, of kayak. Importantly, they do get some funds from us, but really normally it's to run your 4 meetings a year and have an AGM. It's not very much money that we provide. It's not enough to employ staff and that type of thing. It's probably around 70,000 a year. So once you take in the meeting costs and that type of thing, there's not a lot left after that. On a national level, we are in discussions with the federal government about setting up a sort of like the land fund with the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation, a fund which can grow and build and provide support to those PBCs that don't have their own income. Because there are a number of PBCs that do act in their own right now, manage their own rights because they have money, they employ people, have their own offices set up and buy businesses, the whole lot is happening there. But for Ghana, whose native title is still relatively young, I think it was only 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And, but it is an important aspect that you bring up about the resourcing, about the funding they can get. So, and that's something that we're very much involved in trying to talk about how we can better support those PBCs to have the resources to be able to engage, as you're saying. And I strongly believe they should have employees because it's such an active area in which they are with your councils and that type of thing. And they do really need those resources so I can get my staff back as well. But it is something, though, that I think is very important, and we continue to look at how ways we can sort of build wealth for PBCs, especially the difficult thing is where do you start with people who have no money and how do you start building that and that type of thing. So, yeah, it's a difficult job, but it's something we're still working towards.
Look, it is. I understand they got about $6 million out of the settlement, and most of that, as you say, is tied up in things which they agreed to. So they weren't. I don't know the full detail, but I understand they weren't given the liberty of having $6 million in the bank to do with what they wanted. They had to agree to certain things. They are dealing with over 25 councils, and every government department in the state that wants to build a bridge wants a Ghana artwork on it. They're neck deep in consultation with a variety of bodies, and it will only grow. I mean, we're the first council recently to deal with them. They've done a lot of work previously with Marion Council before native title, but kayak is now the official go-to body because of the native title settlement, and others will increasingly gravitate towards that. So who would we write to? Because this will become, I think, a point of failure for kayak, and that's exactly what we do not want to see. Who do you recommend that we write to say, come on, there's got to be some resource put in here or some way of making this work successfully going forward? Because if all 25 or 28 councils start asking them to do the same things we are, they'll be completely overwhelmed. Who can help?
There's NIAA, who provides the funding that we provide. We're funded as an organisation by NIAA as well. That's the Commonwealth level, but I think also the state government should be looking at, I know they've given compensation for the loss of native title rights and that, but the state government should be looking at how to better resource kayak as well. And I know a couple of government agencies that have been speaking with us have asked the question about can they embed employees in there and that type of thing as well. So there are different options maybe on the table that might be available as well. So,
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. A great question from Mayor Martin down in Mount Gambier, and I think it probably captures some challenges many are facing. In their region, the discussion around native title is fairly new, and for a number of reasons, native title is often perceived by some sections of the community as a threat. What would your messages be to those that are concerned? How can we reframe those conversations?
Most certainly. I think what needs to be said to people is that native title has been around for 30 years now. And I'm not sure how long that Southeast native title claim is in. It's one of the newer ones, but maybe 5 or 6 years, I'm not sure. But you know, if people haven't been impacted by native title, then things are not necessarily going to change moving forward because it has been around a long time. And, you know, I've had radio stations call me up and people are worried about what's going to happen when they get native title, but really people have been working certainly in the southeast for at least maybe the last 5 or 6 years with native title. And the only thing that is going to change is that you're going to have certainty about who the people are and who are the traditional owners for that country. And it gives you certainty about building that relationship and working together, and that to address issues that might exist in the southeast. But I think, yeah, it's an important message to give that, you know, everybody has been living with native title in Australia for a long, long time. And if you haven't been impacted by it now, you're probably not going to see any difference moving forward in the future.
Is that okay, Mayor Martin? Is that helpful? Yep, nodding. That's great. Thank you. That's wonderful. Mayor Burgess.
Given that little conversation, and I fully support the native title thing, we are kind of the meat in the sandwich as this conversation goes in. I think we come in late to the discussions and the awareness, and in our world that's full of consultation, I know very little of the background of the title claim that's going on as in a conversation. And coming out the other side, once it's all determined, these are a significant part of our community, Aboriginal people, and I will be interacting with them at some level. Would be probably easier to be informed as we're going through, or be a part, or understand the expectations of people once they get the native title. What's the way we coordinate that between local government and yourselves and the Aboriginal people, rather than reacting to a situation at the end of a journey?
Oh, indeed. And that's why I think it's important to build that relationship early, get that understanding between each other and that type of thing. It's much easier to come together if somebody initiates that. So I would say to local government, don't be shy in coming forward and saying, look, we want to meet and start to understand what your aspirations are and that type of thing. And vice versa, they're going to say to you, you know, we're interested in what you're doing. And they might even say, particularly around certain areas and that type of thing. But very, very important, I think, to have that relationship together. I always have this little mantra that says, you know, good communication is the key to success. And I think it is important to have that communication, that two-way communication. And as I said earlier, having that empathy and understanding that people are different and that people will have different ideas and that type of thing. But it's about working together and finding solutions and that type of thing to implement the things that council wants to do and look at what the Aboriginal groups want to do in those regions as well.
Yeah, the relationship with my local people's quite good on a number of projects we work with, and then there's part of the claim that you're involved with, that relationship is more distance, and sometimes trying to get contact's not easy.
Yep. But you'll probably find a lot of the people you already have relationships that are part of that claim as well in that area. So
that's my struggle.
Okay.
Just an apology there from Bridget and the Coorong having to leave. We've probably got time for one more question. If anyone wanted to ask something, otherwise.
I've got one, if no one else does. Keith, we've got local government elections coming up in November this year. What opportunities exist for traditional owner groups in connecting in with those local, you know, is there an appetite, you think, from traditional owner groups or native title groups to, same thing, sorry, to, you know, engage in that, you know, governance space in local government, local councils?
Look, there probably is an opportunity, but I think historically, a lot of Aboriginal people were probably excluded when you had to be a rates payer or and that type of thing, or a landowner and that type of stuff. I believe that's changed.
Yes, it's open.
And that type of thing. So it's a matter, once again, of communicating that the opportunities are there. And I'm sure there are always people with aspirations to do that type of thing, and that they would take the opportunity to have a go and that type of thing. You know, we've had people standing for state government and that type of thing. So I I absolutely see that there will be a lot of interest at a local government region because it's where the people live and it's in those regions and that type of thing. So I think there's a great opportunity for that to happen.
Mayor Jenkins from Victor Harbour.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point in relation to local government and the elections coming up. One of the things that I'm really conscious of is that often we don't have people representing our community that actually look like our community. And I'd really like to see better representation of the communities in local government. What can we do as a council and perhaps as an LGA to help Indigenous people and local Aboriginal people to put their hands up for local government? Is there anything that you think that we can do to assist with that?
I think it's about getting that information out. And you've reminded me of the great work that the Ngarrindjeri have been doing with the councils. I attended a forum down there that they had with all the local government and that type of thing. And it's those types of things that can happen, a good venue for sharing information and looking at the opportunities, but in communicating that. And I'm not sure if the Ngarrindjeri Aboriginal Corporation puts out newsletters and that type of thing, but it's about trying to get that information and getting it out to the community and that type of thing. So as SANS, we're willing to put that type of information just in general about all local government elections and that in our Aboriginal Way newspaper. We also have the Aboriginal Way radio program, and then we've got our website and Facebook, which we can put information out to people, which captures people out on country and that type of thing. So
yeah. I wonder whether or not, I mean, that's something Leanne, who's here with us, Leanne Simmons, who's involved with our RAP, might be able to talk with the RAP group and also with the Ngarrindjeri Aboriginal Corporation about. From a local government perspective, Clinton, is there anything that the LGA can actually do to encourage more Indigenous representation on councils from a wider LGA perspective?
Look, there's certainly a lot we're doing. We can always do more. There's the huge focus, if you like, of the nominate phase of the advertising around the local government election. So it's sort of split up around nominate, enroll and vote. We take responsibility for that nominate part. And that's about ensuring underrepresented groups are represented on council. And so that certainly forms part of it. I think we had some discussions in the last session, actually, and it's really interesting because it strikes me that the two candidates that spoke to us from New South Wales and Queensland, I think, they were fortunate enough to enjoy sort of major political party support in the background to actually help them get established and carry forward. And then obviously on their own, they became enormously potent contributors to the conversation. But a lot of the work we're doing is around how do we attract, but then also how do we create an environment that's supportive. We support our councils to actually understand and make space for new voices to council. So there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's how do we make sure that we're hitting the mark is the hard part. So, and for me, it's something that we're challenging the team all the time with. These sorts of discussions are important, and where we had that little action item that came out for Shona and I to sort of try and develop a document that gives some golden threads to councils around how they can engage with local communities. Because I think, I mean, personally, I think it goes right back to those conversations and involvement with council generally as a precursor to actually understanding what local government's about and then making those opportunities available for people. I mean, I might have missed something there, but look, I think there's always more we can do, and I think everybody's communities are so different too. That's the other challenge.
I think, Mayor Moira, that the aim of the advertising campaign, there's assets that we supply to councils. Keith and Shona have offered channels that we can leverage through, so their audiences can be receiving the same information, and then through that, we've been in discussions with the electoral commissioner who runs the enrol and vote phase to have a synergistic campaign, so that instead of having say the electoral commission going out with one look and feel and us going out with another, we're trying to align that. They're a little bit late to the discussion, so it's a bit frustrating that they had to focus on the state election first, but basically we're working really hard to try and get that coordination there. And then as soon as we've got that, then I'll be connecting with Keith and Shona to leverage off that. And things like your radio station, for instance, Keith, are you open to mayors coming on? And
certainly, we're always looking to interact.
So I know that Mayor Heather would be willing to talk on that. So would Mayor Moira, Dave, like all of these mayors on here would be willing to have a spot to be able to talk about, you know, why they nominated and what they're getting and how they want the representation to be more reflective of the communities that they're there to serve. So there's other opportunities, and we'll be in direct contact with your administration staff, your comms and your governance staff about those opportunities as we get those established. But just be aware that the LGA is going out in different ways to make sure all the channels we can possibly engage in, that we've got material suitable for that audience ready for that execution.
Thank you.
And just on that, Mayor, too, I'm acutely aware we have quite senior people in local government, mayors included, who have familial connections to First Nation people. And I think it's how do we create an environment where those people are actually comfortable to talk about that? And that's a big challenge as well, I think. And so, yeah, that's just one that I've stored away, and we chip away on how we do that. But it is interesting that I know there are those people out there, but they're maybe not comfortable to actually identify as such.
Can I say another option can be that there's probably some merit in having a formal arrangement with the PBC and that type of thing, like an MOU or something, and set up an advisory committee or something like that, which can provide advice to council and that type of thing as well. So it's another option as well.
I think that there's a real opportunity for elected members to be quite proactive in the mentoring space. So that's as elected members, that's the most useful thing that we can do is behind the scenes real help. You know, if you want to get elected, this is what you do. Type.
So we're probably drawn to a close at the end of our time. But on behalf of all of you, thank you so much, Keith, for coming in and sharing. I've certainly taken a lot of notes. I've seen lots of notes taken on the screen as well. But I sincerely hope that this conversation has been helpful for you. As you probably gathered, some have got some very live issues playing out as we speak. But very happy that we continue the conversation and walk this path side by side with you.
Indeed, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. And just what you said is very important, and certainly SANS is there to provide certainly support services to the Aboriginal groups, but also to support initiatives coming from local government and other places. So we'll walk hand in hand with all groups. And thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Keith. Cool. We've got about 10 minutes.
See you, everyone.
Bye. I'll be the voice of my cook.
That's all right.
Yeah. No, thanks very much. Thank you.
You did great. I know we just ushered him out. Sorry, Keith. But we have got a 10-minute break now, if that's okay. What we do, if you turn your cameras off, and we can come back and maybe mic yourself off too. Don't know what happens behind the mics sometimes, but if 10 minutes and we'll come back after that to wind up our bit of our conversation today, if that's okay.
Cool.
Thank you. We might just mute our end too, if that's okay. Oh, I've got a hot dog. I don't know if I've got
Sorry. I'm sorry.
There's problems over it. I'll give you the back end of this one today.
Can they hear us now?
Yes. Yep. I'm pretty sure. Are we?
Dave, can you hear us?
Oh yeah, he can.
Yeah. Hopefully everyone's back.
Hopefully everybody is back on screen. Thank you, Leanne. Maybe if just a couple more could pop on, just so that we know you're there. Maybe Mayor O'Loughlin. Yes. Oh, there we go. Yep. Fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. Just didn't want us to start and only have a few people on the screen. Look, we're at the exciting part of the meeting where it's just a chance to run through and update anybody on any new activities in this space that you're undertaking since our last meeting, or anything exciting you just want to share with us that you're doing in this space. I know some of you touched on some things in your introductions, but maybe rather than just go around the room, just by people popping your hand up and letting us know, let's get underway.
Claire,
I know last time you were really excited. Claire,
I always like to give someone else
your new space. Maybe you want to give us a run of how that's going.
Oh my gosh, I like to wait and let someone else speak, but you know, I can't help myself. So the stage we're up to now is, of course, last time I mentioned that our council has committed the funds, which is roughly $40 million onto this new cultural space. And it's become very clear from all of the elected body that we then wanted to hand it back to the custodians who have been leading this project. So I was listening intently to the conversation before around how can we have more Aboriginal voices within our elected bodies. And sometimes, unfortunately, democracy doesn't allow that to happen in the way that we'd like it to happen. But we're finding another way for the voice to be there. So the custodians are now trying to agree on a name of the space. I understand that's become quite complex, but at that point then we'll be going back onto land and there'll be a naming process put in place by the custodians. So it's been really exciting actually, because the elected body have very clearly said, we've done that formality that we have to do, but we're done now. We want to hand it all back to the process, which is being led by the custodians. So our next challenge, I think, will really be around the procurement process and how we can have, hopefully, a majority-led building by Aboriginal people. That's going to be a challenge, but it's something that we're really hoping we can work through. And then the next will be the governance model around how the centre is, how it's utilised, who leads the usage of the space. And we think that council will still have a really strong role in that, but we want it to be still led by Aboriginal people in our community. So we know there's some bits to come, but we're certainly having the conversations and we're fully committed to making those tough times, getting through them, I guess, and learning at the other end of it.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Claire. And Mayor Burgess just popped up to a couple of links in the message, well, not links, but some resources in the chat box. The New South Wales LGA has a Collaborate resource kit and Victorian Aboriginal and local government strategy there as well. So they might be worth a look. But thanks, Mayor Claire, for that update. Certainly very exciting. Really looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Clinton, we have permission from LG New South Wales to use those resources on Collaborate New South Wales.
So just someone was just saying we do have permission from New South Wales LGA to utilise those resources. So that's great. Anybody else wanted to add anything into the mix? Yep, Mayor Burgess.
Pete's view of the native title, and I don't share his rose garden. It's not quite as easy as that process, and connecting the dots is not as easy. And some people in this process are feeling quite threatened, and I'm in the middle trying to balance that, which is not a pleasant space to be in. But I know they will play out as it is, and we'll accept what the result is. But the collateral of the outcome might not be worth the outcome at the way it's heading.
Something we were chatting about in the break, Mayor, too. I mean, obviously the challenge of engaging early is made all the more challenging when often you don't see it coming, or it's how do you find the right people. But also I wonder if we would all benefit from very much just a Treaty 101 type document explaining the main phrases, the main types of thinking, because there was a few times there where I didn't necessarily want to ask Keith what does exactly that mean, but I wonder if that actually might be helpful.
Possibly be
Sorry, no, what did I say?
Treaty
101. No, let's leave that
that's
one.
another.
That one's another discussion.
That's another one.
Native title 101, I'm sorry. Whether that might actually be helpful too.
Would probably be helpful. I think also would be helpful if we were in some of the discussions and giving the local government background to what we understand of the situation that they're moving forward to. I'm sure that's practical or not, but I think it's worth a thought. That's
maybe something we can turn our mind to here, Mayor, about how the LGA can at least help try and, I don't have a promise, but how do we create an environment where those views and discussions are understood and heard early? Perhaps if we can.
How do we bring our view? How do we bring our understanding of the situation, which I accept will be totally wrong, but at least if our view of the situation is put there, the parties that are having the discussions can then work through what's perceived from another space.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it is quite a tricky one because the native title process obviously happens quite separate, in terms of the determinations, and the legal process is quite a complex space. So I think navigating that space might be a really important one, and maybe you do have a part to play in that, and providing a pathways forward in native title is something that could be explored. And I'm sure Keith obviously talked about his enthusiasm. I don't know if it was on here or out there, one of the two, around wanting to make that process one that's clearer and easier and more productive for everybody. Because if everybody's on the same page, it's much easier for the business to get done on the ground with community and with council. So yeah.
And to your point, Mayor O'Loughlin too, we'd actually had a conversation just prior to the meeting, interestingly enough, around how do we support local government to understand, particularly across Ghana land, that there's only really two people that they're dealing with at the other end, and how do we, to your point, how do they get resourced, but then how do we manage our interactions with them as a sector too, so that we're not creating unrealistic expectations or setting anybody up to fail in terms of how they might be viewed with how long things are taking or the like. So it's interesting that came up too in conversation.
I think it's something that we need to work on with state and perhaps federal government. I'll be certainly writing a letter on behalf of my council. When we sit around the table to have these discussions, we've agreed to pay the kayak representatives an hourly rate, which they only get paid when they're sitting in the room. They don't get paid to do any preparatory work, because how do we know what that is or what it isn't? But everyone else in the room is getting paid an allowance, as I do as a mayor and the elected members, and everyone else is professional staff around the table as council members. So it's completely lopsided in terms of resourcing. They've all got to have other jobs or they're retired. Their own organisations decided not to pay their board members a fee, unlike I think every other native title organisation. They are vastly overwhelmed with the amount of requests they're getting to participate and organise artists and sift through who should be saying what at what citizenship ceremony on what date, a number of complex matters regarding who should be overseeing works, who should be looking at works programs. It just goes on and on. They realistically should have an administration of probably 20 people to deal with what they're already doing, let alone as it grows over time. They will become a mini department if they're trying to service all of the aspirations and connections in the 25 or 28 council members. And it can't go on being funded on an hourly rate by councils, which I'm happy to do, but that's just not a sustainable model for them. And they have a lot of work to do because they cover the vast majority of settlement in this state in terms of population and therefore capital works activity and cultural activity. And you've heard what Claire talk about what Port Adelaide Infield's doing, which is absolutely fabulous. But you imagine the time they've had to put into understanding that and working out how that works and how it's governed and who participates. and it's still only in its infancy. It's a massive, massive job. So I think, you know, as I say, I'll write in. And the other thing I wanted to say, well, I've got the talking stick, is representation of Indigenous people on councils is a long way from being a success. I think it's totally unrealistic to expect people to put their hand up and be successful if they've never had any engagement with local government before. I think it runs a risk of being a bit tokenistic. What I think is a better pathway is that we establish really good structures for RAPs and for maybe native title discussions or maybe Makarrata processes like we're trying to do, and get local people engaged in those processes. And ultimately, they may become formal committees and therefore formal committee members. And once they understand how the system works, they're going to be in a much, much better position to put their hand up and run for office at full council level. I think that'd be a better way to go about it. Notwithstanding, there may be people who can put their hand up, know how to campaign and win, which I think would be absolutely fabulous, no doubt about it. But I just think we've got to be realistic. You know, there's only 500 Ghana people in the whole Ghana area. You know, and that covers, how many councils would that be? Well, as I said, 25. So yeah. We've got to get our ducks in a row here.
I think your point's well made, David. And I think there's also other opportunities to look at our systems and structures and legislative tools as well. I think it's, you know, I think there's a whole raft of options that sit in that space, but you know, let's step into it with with optimism, but also, you know, we've got to step into it, because what frustrates, I suppose, our agenda is that we all say it's all too hard and don't go there. And so it's another 20 years before we have this conversation again. I think it's a really great, you know, using the systems and the structures we've got now, but also the energy that we've moved, you know, that we're garnering right now, not Ghana, but garnering right now. I think there is an opportunity to look at that and learn each time as we go. And I think, you know, we've had this conversation summer before, you know, it's not like we're going to, have every council's going to have First Nations representative sitting there, but there's certainly, signaling to the community that this is something that's a real, destination or somewhere we want to go. Then, 2-3 cycles down the train, we're starting to get much more interest and take up in this space, and that's the opportunity we've got now, is to start that process of signaling, letting people know that this is where this is something meaningful for us. Yeah.
And certainly I observed it when I was at AICD, particularly in a lot of the Aboriginal owned organisations, where the concept of succession onto some of these boards might start, and it's where the ASIC and the ORIC sort of legal construct around governance didn't necessarily make it easy, but that point of succession started 5 or 6 years before that person actually joined that board, because they'd get brought along to things and they'd observe, they'd be a part of a subcommittee. And then by the time the ask came to say, well, look, why don't you consider joining this board? Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. That person could then say, well, no, look, I've observed you, you've done this, you've done that, you've sat on that committee, you've had that voice, you've had that opinion. And it was just something that slowly built in the background. And so in that construct, it certainly works. So David, yeah, the idea of, we have these things, but there is a view that this is what actually we're trying to achieve, as well as getting that voice. It's about creating those opportunities for people to naturally move through, to build understanding and build confidence before taking that sort of final step, if you like, onto putting their hand up to join a council. I'd be scared.
Yeah.
Just with the unknowns of what's sort of happening. I know I'm not the target market, but I like that idea of utilising those things that we do have, but with an endpoint in mind, that we move towards that maybe.
We're even, we run another cluster group like this for education. And one of the initiatives we've got running in there is around introducing First Nations voice in the civics program around local government, state government and federal government. So even conversations are happening with year 10, 11 and 12 students at the moment around First Nation representation in governance bodies. So, we are stimulating interest in that space early on, but that's something we're working on, rolling that out across all the 3 independent, Catholic and government sectors. So that's happening now, but even now that's still a little ways off. But that's where we're also thinking in the space as well.
And Shona, our research says if we don't start in primary and secondary schools, you lose a huge audience that will take a lot longer to engage once they're out of the system than it would be had we really got the civics program embedded really well from primary through to secondary, and they're more likely to consider it if it's there rather than try and approach how we're currently doing it. So I've said, and I don't think I've actually said this loud enough to reach Clinton yet, but as far as I'm concerned, we can do as much as we can for this year's campaign, but unless we start working with all councils from January 2023 onwards to engage and build those connections with community groups, Aboriginal communities in your communities, then we'll have the same problem in 2026 and then 2030. So we have to use any opportunity that you see somebody in your community and who you're exposed to that could be potentially interested, start educating them about the value of councils and what councils do in their communities to start getting their interest. From youth advisory committees, we went down to a youth group down in Ranella, Base 10 camp, which is a amazing facility that Onca has for their young people. And we talked to these 18-year-olds and they all said, if you had told us this when we were in primary school or secondary school, we think the only thing important is state and federal government. We didn't even know about councils. Why didn't they tell us about councils? They only told us about state and federal government. So there's those sort of things that we all need to probably, stand up and get involved a bit more. I know councils run programs with schools, and it's really through that research proven that unless we start really early, it's a much harder task to get engagement.
No, look, that's really, really helpful. And I think that's, it's incumbent on all of us to keep the conversation and the momentum going forward. Look, we've heard from Mayor Clare and Mayor Burgess and O'Loughlin. Does anybody else want to add anything into the mix on some things? Yeah, Marnie. Now, I think City of Halifax Bay, that's right. Didn't get a chance to properly introduce you earlier. There was some issues with your sound connecting, but Marnie, welcome. Love to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. Look, just building on some of the comments made by both Claire and David O'Loughlin. Some of our experiences at City of Halifax Bay is that Ghana in particular, and I do connect with some of the sentiments that David actually said, is that there's limited resources and you're dealing with elders that are sometimes poor in health and they have limited time to be able to stretch their knowledge and resources across many different councils. So one of the things that we ask Ghana is, how would you like to engage with us as a council? But what I'm hearing is that there's lots of different ways that actually Ghana work with each of the councils. So City of Prospect are developing a treaty. Like City of Port Adelaide Enfield are dealing with them on a project by project basis, and that may change the way that that council interacts with Ghana may change dependent on the project that's available. I think so. It would be good as a collective that when we're dealing with separate nations to ask Ghana specifically how they would like to engage with the councils consistently. So it's the same for City of Prospect as it is for the City of Halifax Bay, as it is for the City of Enfield, rather than a combination of, I suppose, approaches to keep those relationships facilitated. So one of the things that City of Halifax Bay did quite some time ago now is that we actually set up an advisory group consisting of 3 elders, but all of our council projects actually come through that mechanism. And coupled with that, we actually did a cultural research project which covered our entire city, pulling together cultural management plans. But it actually gave practical steps that needed to be taken for high levels, high areas of high sensitivity, moderate sensitivity, and low cultural sensitivity where there was high disturbance. We actually embedded that into our GIS mapping system. So staff on a daily basis needed to engage with that system if they were undertaking work. So what happened is that employees would then raise and come directly through to myself or our Arts and Culture officer that would escalate that, and we'd funnel all of the, I suppose, priority projects that needed to keep moving into these formal meetings, and we actually set it in our budget. So to David's point earlier is that you need to budget for paying for people, like we pay for archaeological services or architectural services or whatever. It needs to form part of your annual budget. And I think one of the other things is that it's hard to maneuver, like Dave Burgess was saying earlier, that sometimes it gets pretty tricky, and we're very clear to delineate what's Ghana business and what's actual, and we don't get involved as council in Ghana business, but we strategize how we're actually going to move projects forward. Now, the other tricky thing that I just wanted to raise amongst this group was around kayak and the native title, because not all projects were going through to kayak through that mechanism prior to the new board being formed. And so we were operating in section 37s and instead of going through a section 23, if there were section 23, if it was higher levels of disturbance and requiring monitors on site, through to a section 37, which only required you to consult with an advisory group that actually held knowledge, traditional owners that had knowledge. And so that's actually becoming trickier and trickier now with the new kayak board. And I thought I'd just lay that on the table, is that that's where I think councils that are part of a particular nation need to discuss how that approach with Ghana is going to work moving forward and have that consistency. So I just thought I'd lay that on the table for consideration amongst this group, that consistency is going to be really important moving forward, to ensure that we can not only support Ghana, but also to support the projects moving forward in a, I suppose, in a timely manner.
Yeah, that's really good, Marnie. And I wonder if I might just drawing on sort of Dave's experience and Lynette in Mount Gambier and James, what you're observing in Robe, perhaps where as a council you may not necessarily have large structures to support these discussions, where do those relationships rest? Is it with you to have those conversations with the traditional owners? Is it the CEOs, or do you have people within the team just to sort of help maintain those relationships and the understanding of what's happening? Because I think that's part of the trick. And I like your point, Marnie, about not getting involved in here on the plains as it is Ghana business, but it strikes me that as you go further out from the CBD, that challenge perhaps becomes a bit greater, because it's inextricably linked to the communities that our mayors and our council chambers are serving. But Lynette or Dave or James, did you have a view on that?
Thanks, Clinton. I'm actually going to call on, I've got Ben Kilsby sitting with me today, and he works very closely with our First Nations people in this area, and he's probably better to answer this.
And look, our situation would not be dissimilar to most councils. We have a community reference group that sits alongside our reconciliation action plan, and they meet twice a year, and those meetings are quite heavy as a result. But in between that, there's quite a lot of engagement individually with some of our cultural leaders within that group, but also through email discussion quite frequently. We also have a cultural authority here. It's a model that's in place that really guides us on much of the work we do outside of the work with that community reference group, and that is working with our Aboriginal controlled organisations here locally. We have a meeting with them at the start of each year to sort of put a framework in place as to who are the emerging leaders within our community that we should be working with and taking advice from. So that gives the opportunity for us to draw a line in the sand once a year in terms of guidance in that space as well. And realistically, through those particular identified elders, through our Aboriginal controlled organisations and through our community reference group, that makes up our our model as to we use for our own cultural governance that guides us. Does that help you? Is that?
Absolutely. And I noticed James Hollyman in Rope, his hands up there, James.
I was just going to raise, we face a number of challenges. So we've already had the discussion around contested authority. So could speak on behalf of, and I know there's a group that the state meet with, which is different to the group we've connected through the Burundi's Corporation. And again, as I said, COVID's obviously interfered in our process or trying to build and create the relationship. But we face, I suppose, like David O'Loughlin said, an issue as a council in terms of a similar sort of resourcing. So being one of the smaller councils in the state, this process falls to me and one of my elected members. And so it's an action that's undertaken in association with all the other things we're doing across council, but a very committed council to drive through this process.
That's great. Thank you for that perspective, James. That's excellent. Sorry.
Huh?
I can't across you before.
Oh, that's all right. I'm used to that. I did prior to the Ghana. I just wanted to something that popped up before the Ghana elections and the changeover in leadership with Ghana is that I was having conversations with Uncle Jeffrey at the time around. I suppose, the 25, I think he said 23, but it's 25 councils though. We're talking about just the sheer volume of, quite obviously sensitive conversations, cultural heritage conversations, looking to expand and grow, optimistic conversations and developments that were happening. Then there were, welcome to countries and then storytelling conversations. And just the breadth of demand was massive, but he was very clear saying, but I don't want the demand to stop. I want it to keep coming. Shona, how do we handle this? Can you organise a summit between Ghana and all the councils so we can all come together and do exactly what you're talking about around, as a collective piece, come together and sort out how we want to do this, recognising limitations of capacity, but not wanting to dull the enthusiasm and the opportunity to engage, because that wasn't the appetite at that stage. It was just around how can we manage this well. And then obviously, we started making some plans, and then the governance changeover happened. So I have connected with Auntie Ros and Uncle Les around some of that conversations. I have not pushed hard because they themselves are kind of establishing what they want to do, and you know, obviously resetting the direction that they want to take the organisation in. So I can commit to go back and follow up that conversation with Auntie Ros and Uncle Les around a Ghana summit with, you know, local government type summit, not anything else beyond my remit, but I know that Keith was keen to be a part of that because they're obviously providing the back end support. So I have spoken with Keith at SANS because they provide the administrative capacity at the moment for Ghana. Certainly, you know, had a conversation with Clinton about that. So I suppose, you know, as a reconciliatory body, I'm happy to go back and follow up with, you know, the new Ghana governance, I suppose, around whether they'd still like to progress with that and then progress the conversations with the powers that be and yourselves around if that's where you'd like to go on the Ghana topic. Absolutely, it was already something in the conversation piece, but I have put my foot off the pedal with the governance changeover. Didn't want to step over or step into anything or on anything. I really wanted to allow that to come through, but it's obviously a message that's coming through loud and clear, and happy to take that back on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if that's helpful.
How big we wanted to make it, we could potentially have some
Observers?
satellite things
Yeah.
happening in other
Yeah.
in other regions, in other lands as well, because it strikes me that for many of you in the regional areas too, you do have crossover in our boundaries as they relate to First Nations boundaries. So I think we'll absolutely look to progress that.
Yeah, I know, for example, it's been raised at Adelaide
Yes.
Council where
Adelaide,
they,
yeah.
that's just two different
ones, yeah.
Absolutely. Look, in the
David wants to as well.
9 or 10 minutes we've got left, I don't want to hold you here just for the sake of holding you here. Are there any other updates that people want to? Sorry, Leanne.
I was just going to mention about the city of Victor Harbor because we're on Nurringerry land. Nurringerry land is a lot of council districts as well. So Victoria is our CEO is in the process of working with all of the other councils in that region to formalise a contract, I suppose, with the Nurringerry Aboriginal Corporation. And so we've found that really useful in that we do, when we're developing our RAP and those kind of things, have found it a good starting point, I guess, in saying, can you tell us who you'd like us to negotiate with? And so, you know, they've given us some recommendations for cultural advisors, recommendations for heritage and other groups that we can go to. So I think having those processes in place is a really good option. And the other thing I'd just like to mention is about the discussions that we've had about resourcing is really important, obviously, but also the discussion around council and elected members. And I think we're talking lots about asking our First Nations people about what they should do, but I think we also need to have a look at what are the barriers that we put up that stop that happening in the first place, and sort of looking inward as well as outward about what we can do to change some of those things.
So I'm just writing that down. Leanne, thank you for that.
Clinton, if I could just jump in and just back what Shona's offered, which is to draw together kayak with the councils interested in having a conversation. I think that's a great idea. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but I agree with Marnie that there's some councils doing quite a bit and there's other councils who are at a starting position, and kayak is getting completely overwhelmed. And I think we need to work with them to sort out how we need to have a deeper understanding of their issues to start with. And they're a complex group of people with a new native title settlement and a new responsibility trying to work through massive issues. It's a bit like starting a new council where there's already a population, if you can imagine that. You know, they're still writing a strategic plan and trying to agree what their key objectives will be. They're still trying to work out how to share the workload around so that everybody who's, you know, who they have faith in gets a share of the workload. So they'll recommend different people in different places, not because they don't like the others, but because they think that some people aren't getting enough work out of the whole movement. And I think we've just got to have an understanding about that and respect what they're trying to do and the complexity of it, and the lack of resources. I perhaps just want to wave a flag saying several of us were involved in the Indigenous Land Use Agreement discussions that ran for years. And so I'd be really cautious about setting up a committee structure to work with all councils straight away. I think that everyone could end up being buried in that, trying to come to some sort of consensus across all those councils. It didn't work before. It's far too complex, but there might be some kind of structure which is free enough to provide information, but the individual negotiations are council by council within that overall framework. I reckon the LGA can add a lot of value in that. And I heard from the last speakers quite right. There are other nations that have multiple councils within them, and I think if LGA could help work out what is the best way to move these conversations forward as a collective and then individually, I think that would be very, very valuable. And what are the resources available to us to have conversations and some of the elements of structure, like, we know we can do RAPs, we know we can have Makarrata discussions, et cetera, and just sort of lay that out. It's a huge body of work, but I think Shona's on the right path, having those broad conversations and then allowing the individual ones to happen as well, because that's how councils work anyway.
What we might do by way of closing is thank you all for your questions and input and attendance today in today's topic. Hopefully it's been useful. We always do, part of our close, encourage you to feed any ideas back to us that you might have around topics for future get-togethers, because it is very much driven by your needs and requirements. We've got a lot of notes from today, which we will combine and get out to all of you. But certainly from my perspective, thank you so much for being a part of today. Shona?
No, thank you for your willingness to engage. It's not, there's no silver, you're right, there's no silver bullet on any of this stuff, but the fact that we're getting around having a conversation and sharing what works is the most important part of that. And I appreciate you allowing me into your world just for the moment, for for a short 2 hours every 3 months. I do appreciate it. And look, we are there, around a whole bunch of things on the side. So please feel free to contact. Again, keep contacting us if you need support. There has been a notable increase in council engagement with us at Reconciliation SA, so we are grateful for that. It means your councils are actively interested in this area, and that's what we're all about. So I do appreciate that.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks those that did deputise today. For others who are normally here, genuinely value your input and participation, so thanks very much. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
See ya.
That's some massive pieces of work.
Yeah.